All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Bettina. I'm your host for today. And before we get started, I just wanted to go quickly over some Zoom etiquette. So please mute yourself while we're chatting. You can have your video on or off. It's lovely to see you. Please use the chat freely. Let us know where you're dialing in from and share your LinkedIn. These events are really all about building a community amongst climate tech marketers. We will share the slides and the recording with everyone who registered. So don't worry if you have to drop off, which we don't hope, but you'll get all the material. And then there will also be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So please collect your questions, pop them in the chat as we go along, or once we get to it, you're also free to unmute yourself and come on stage. Quick introductions. As mentioned, I'm your host for today. I'm Bettina. I'm the partner and president at Alder Co. We are a marketing firm focused on climate tech with the mission of advancing the adoption of climate technologies until they become universal. We support startups and purpose-driven brands from brand to scale, driving their growth so they can make a big impact. At Alder, I lead marketing, business development, and sales for the agency and advise our clients on growth marketing. I also serve as Cleantech Open's National Marketing Chair, and I'm based in the Bay Area. Our moderator for today is my business partner and founder and chief marketing strategist at Alder, Melanie Adamson. Originally starting out as a journalist, Melanie spent the last 20 years in marketing and PR for energy and climate tech. She leads Alder's creative and strategic teams to produce successful and effective marketing deliverables for our clients. When she's not running Alder, she loves cooking and entertaining friends over a glass of French or Spanish. Mel is based at our HQ in Portland, Oregon. Before we dive into today's discussion, we just wanted to make sure to invite you all to Tofu, our community for climate tech marketers, if you haven't already. It's a really great place to learn, network, and find your tribe. And I'll be popping the link into the chat momentarily. So let's move on to our panelists. Really excited to welcome Kristan Kirsh, VP of Global Marketing at Nextracker. Kristan has driven Nextracker's brand strategy, event marketing, and communications program since 2015. And in her tenure at Nextracker, she and her team built the Nextracker brand from an emerging startup to the market leader in solar tracker technology. Prior to working at Nextracker, Kristan held leadership positions at cleantech firm Energy Recovery and at the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, Fairtrade USA, and Cisco. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of California at Santa Barbara and 2 master's degrees from the University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Kristan is also based in the Bay Area. And then last but not least, Jill Kirkpatrick. She's Senior Manager of Events at Greentown Labs. At Greentown Labs, Jill leads the strategy, planning, and project management and execution of events. She previously held event management and marketing positions at Greentech Media and LEK Consulting. Jill is a graduate of Suffolk University and based in Boston. So glad to have the East Coast represented here too today. Please let us know in the chat where you're dialing in from. Share your LinkedIn profiles. Would really be great to hear who's in the room. I'm just going to stop sharing quickly. Or not. Mel, over to you.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you here today. Back in early January, when Bettina and I were talking about, how are we going to get our community together and what are some of the topics that, we want to talk about. And the biggest thing on the top of our minds back then was events. Our clients were coming to us, they were asking us about event, what should be our event strategy for this year? And, if you guys remember, not too long ago, Omicron was still raring, and, and we've come off, 2 years of virtual, hybrid, in-person meetings, and we're not really sure what our event strategy was going to be this year, and not only for our clients but also for us. Do we take the chance? Do we send a team of people out to events? How, and then what kinds of events are we holding for ourselves? As part of our marketing mix. Is it a combination of things? Do people use business cards anymore? I mean, there's a range of things that, we've been thinking about in terms of events. And so we wanted to bring together a panel that we know and love that do an amazing job. And we're really excited to have Kristan and Jill here today to talk about event strategy for 2022. And get your questions ready. We'll have a Q&A and we'll start integrating those into our discussion here. So can't wait to hear what your questions are. So with that, we'll let Kristan go ahead.
Well, good morning. Good afternoon. I see that's maybe even a good evening for those people in London, which is pretty cool to have out of the United States folks to join as well. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Cool. So first off, I'm thrilled to be able to even say that we're doing live events again. So let's just start with that and raise a glass of whatever you're doing and drinking right now. I'm drinking coffee. It is the morning in California. So before I go into our global event marketing program, just a few facts about Nextracker and what the company does to familiarize yourself with who we are. We're an OEM provider of smart solar trackers and software solutions used on ground mount utility scale and DG solar power plants. If you're not familiar with ground mount solar versus rooftop and or CNI, DG or commercial industrial, Nextracker systems serve as the backbone of the power plants that you may have seen from a plane, and you'll find them in just about every corner of the world these days. So what you're looking at behind me is actually a power plant, which is 250 megawatts in the Central Valley of California. We have over 60 gigawatts of systems contracted and have shipped 50 gigawatts just in total this past year. Pretty big numbers, so don't be scared by the numbers. Shoals can contend the same. My colleague Kathy is on the line as well, so great to have you here, Kathy. It's nice to be doing this with you and see you in the audience. And from a leadership standpoint, we've held global leadership market share for the last 6 years. We have around 550 staff and 9 regional offices. I say that because as you're looking at the globe and thinking about where you might be with your event marketing program, your budget, where your sales team has targets and where your company's business growth lies, the X's on the map were not there, so say 5 or 6 years ago. So we've grown considerably. We've grown very fast. We've grown with the market, which has been super thrilling. But it's also been, working with finance and working with sales and trying to figure out what those budget numbers are. And we can get to that at any time. And please just, raise your hand or send us a question in terms of like, how do you do budgets? And simple questions like that are not always the easiest answers. So go ahead and go to slide 2, please. Cool. So I thought it might be good to calibrate where we are today, 2 years later. So now onto the good stuff that you're here to learn about. Let's try and run down a quick timeline of the past 2 years to just kind of like see where we are. In March of 2020, the US went into lockdown, full quarantine, and we thought it would only last a month. My events director at the time, my dear colleague, Ali Monge, who may be on this event, and I can't see her here yet, but she sprang us into action to evaluate our in-person event program, budget, what this could mean for shipping, We were supposed to go to Intersolar Munich within a month or two. We had to pull back on all of that. So everything changed, right? So what ensued was months of waiting, canceling events, and sunk costs. Events oftentimes for, I don't know the group here, and I look forward to hearing some of your stories, but for Nextracker, 40% of our budget is events. So that's considerable. And we have to speak to that to the executive level and show ROI on every event. So months turned into a year, and then another year. We pivoted. We learned how to use new online platforms, which were usually relegated to PD Magazine. And my good buddy Jill Kirkpatrick, when she was over at GTM, they had this great platform, and we said, oh, let's use GTM's old platform, or how do we do this on our own? So we started to think about that. We averaged a webinar every week, whereas we usually had 2 to 3 webinars a year. So we're looking at webinars in the online space as the place that sales would be done erroneously. And as an extrovert myself, you just can't do that. So what did we learn? Let's go into this. Our sales team were absolutely crushed. The constant discussion in sales and marketing was around how can we see customers? How can we see customers? We worked with our sales team to actually go and look at those hubs of where those customers were located, and we met them where they're at, and we met them outside and on solar power plants. And that way, making lemonade from lemons, we actually got to be on the power plant that we helped develop with them. And we really were very strategic and very focused. And so then the big learning for that first year was, sales can simply not sell online. They need to read customer faces, and that's just really hard to do on a Zoom call. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. This slide is a representation of our event marketing effort over the years in a particular market that in 2016 was an emerging market for us in the Middle East. The Middle East has rose to be one of the top solar and wind renewable energy hubs and markets globally. And they're taking it very seriously, and we have risen with the Middle East's growth in terms of share market share. So in 2016, we started. Melanie and Bettina thought it might be an interesting idea to kind of show what happens when you're a startup and then you get to be #1 market share, $1.4 billion in revenue. What does that look like in terms of marketing, right? So in 2016. The booth spaces were already taken up, and in the World Future Energy Summit that takes place in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. And there were no booth spaces. We had a couple banners, we had some tablecloths, and you know what? That's what we did. And that was okay for that moment in time when we were a startup. And we got to meet with some new customers, generate some leads, and we got to actually walk the show floor. So what that meant for us, to be honest with you, no one really came by our booth because we were in the perimeter. But what it allowed us to do was see how people interact on the show floor and what we could be doing in the following years. So what ensued was integrated marketing approaches, PR approaches, getting to know our trade organization in the region. And incidentally, for those of you that do work internationally and or in the United States, get to know your trade organization, whether it's ACP or CALSA or SIA or all of the above. Your trade organization is going to be your partner in every show. So anyways, going from 2016 to today, we just had this event 2 months ago, and we had a beautiful booth. We have everything dialed in. They had canceled the event for 2 solid years, so this was the first time, much like those of you who might know SPI, which is Solar Power International. rebranded to RE Plus. Those are some of our seminal shows that we go every year. So this year we were able to do a site visit right outside of Dubai. We have a 1 gigawatt solar power plant that has Nextracker systems on it, as well as our software. We were able to meet with customers. We were able to map that directly to all of our activity at the show floor. We were also able to do a full wraparound PR program that went with that. So as you're ramping up, going from left to right of the screen, take your time, be patient, get to know your trade organizations, align with your sales teams, and look and see what are those opportunities that you can wrap in as a total package for your event. Don't just look at it as in isolation. It's a trade show booth. There are so many more things that you can be doing that wrap around that trade show booth. So those are kind of a few takeaways. You know, I'd say get creative. People are really tired of being online, as we all know. After all, marketers and salespeople were extroverts by nature, so we feed off people. Be educational. Every location has its own COVID parameters and guidelines. For this past show in Abu Dhabi, for example, I kid you not, of 16 of us that came from all over the globe, we had our sales team coming in from Hyderabad, from Spain, from the US. And we all had to do COVID tests, of course, going into the country before we even got on our plane. And then we had to do COVID tests every other day, going from Abu Dhabi, one state, going into another state, and to Dubai. And then upon leaving. So all told, we did 72 PCR tests. So get to know your local, the guidelines that your show is giving you, as well as the country guidelines. And that's probably the same, I would imagine, for the US when you're going from state to state. Make sure your sales team knows well in advance what they're going into, what the show floor looks like. You've got your sales meetings all set up, and track those accordingly, and then be prepared and have a plan A, B, and C. Those contingency plans are sometimes lifesavers. And again, align with your sales team as much as you can. And then lastly, and I know Kathy, you'll relate to this well, because we actually teamed up on this pre-SPI into 2020 and 2021. Know your show cancellation policies. Some shows went ahead and did their shows with areas that had a very, very high COVID rates, and they kept it. They didn't know if they were going to be canceling, and then they went ahead and had the show 1 month in advance. So that doesn't give us as event marketers a lot of time to plan, ship, and do all the logistics planning that we need to do, because that oftentimes is, you know, we need 3 to 4 to 5 months to do that. So that's what I have. I'm going to turn it over to Jill, and look forward to any questions. I think we're going to do a brief Q&A right now before we head over to Greentown Labs.
Actually, I have one quick question before we move on to Jill. I'm curious to know, what are you all doing within the next year? So you've got great lessons learned, and I love, you know, how you all pivoted really quickly and went straight into, you know, the machine of webinars. So what is, I mean, that's really a machine.
Experience of my marketing director, my event marketing director. Hopefully she'll still like me.
Yeah. So what does it look like now? Are you pushing really hard on external, you know, face-to-face trade shows and conferences, or are you still doing a mix of in-person? What's the ratio like? What does that look like for you guys?
Sure. Well, since we spent a lot of money and not knowing who was going to be showing up to the webinars, and really doing big pushes, and even online advertising sometimes to get those attendees up, you know, it's really not a place to do sale. It's just not. It's our global sales team is dying to get back to meet with their customers in person. This is where they're building their relationships. It's hard to build relationships that way. So it's just the nature of sales. We're pulling back on our webinars. We're not going to do webinars on our own. It's just not cost effective, and it's way more work than we can handle for our resources. So we're going back into doing, let's say, 4 or 5, 6, possibly 6 webinars in our regional, where our regions are. So Latin America, United States, we'll do a few. We have some product launches coming up. So, you're looking at, you have to think about go back to integrated marketing 101. So you have a few webinars, launch your product online. If you can't attach it to a trade show that's in person, let's say SPI or ACP, or if you're doing any of the regional events and wind, just do it. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Do some Google ads, raise your SEO strategy. There's a lot of things that you can be doing online, and then pushing event attendance and things like that. And we are going back, doing mostly in person, but we're also doing a little bit more user forums where we control the narrative, and it ends up being our content, and that we can lead that. So we team up with the likes of PVAL, RETC, Renewable Energy Test Labs, NREL, and organizations like that are very well respected. And then we bring in independent engineers that can also speak to the trends that are happening in the marketplace, and are specifically utility scale solar and O&M and asset management best practices and things like that.
Okay.
So look to your partners and spend money that way. One of the things that we did with some of the module partners is we did split cost. Instead of paying $15,000 or $20,000 for a webinar with PV Magazine, why don't you split costs and do it with a module partner or an inverter partner, or, again, like Shoals, or, any of your partners that you have the same customers. So try to be better conscious with knowing where those dollars are going to go. And then the benefit of partnering is that you get their list and they get your list. So you're getting more bang for your buck in terms of registrations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the same goes for in-person events. Team up with a partner and share booth space.
Mm-hmm.
Tag team on 2 conference rooms on your booth.
Yeah.
Lots of ideas.
That's really cool.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I love that. All right, well, let's take it away, Jill. It's all you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So excited and happy to be joining you here from a sunny and cold Boston to discuss climate tech events with you all. It's obviously a huge topic right now, and also a big question mark across a lot of industries, and not just climate tech. So really love that we're having this discussion, and a huge thank you to Bettina and Mel for having me and creating the opportunity to do just that. Also so excited to share the virtual stage with Kristan, who, as she mentioned earlier, I worked with quite closely when I was back at Green Tech Media. So this feels full circle, and loved hearing her perspective from the other side. But yeah, today I'm here and happy to represent Greentown Labs. We are the largest climate tech startup incubator in North America, and we have our headquarters in Somerville, Mass, which is where I'm located, and a second location that we opened last year in Houston, Texas. So convening and fostering an inclusive community is core to the mission of Greentown Labs. And as our events manager, I have the honor and pleasure of working across all of our teams to help drive that mission by leading the planning and execution of our events. All in, I think we host over 230 events a year, both virtually and in our event space. We have a dedicated event space in both of our locations. So this is encompassing our public events, our community meetups and networking, private partner engagements, tour groups, and third-party hosted events. So today I'm kind of talking about our bigger public-facing ecosystem event strategy and how we create those brand experiences, since that's most relevant to this discussion and also the majority of what my role focuses on. But I would be remiss if I didn't highlight all the opportunities for connection and collaboration that Greentown provides. So just diving into some of those key areas that I'm going to touch on today when thinking about our climate tech event strategy. Number one for Greentown as a climate tech incubator is and always is highlighting our startups, right? So that's our North Star at Greentown, and our event strategy follows that very closely as well. From an engagement perspective, that means that every time we do something or we start to plan to do something, we ask ourselves, how does it benefit our members? As you can imagine, early stage startups often don't have even a marketing person, potentially even marketing budget. Oftentimes they're just one founder wearing a lot of hats and juggling a lot of different responsibilities. So bringing these opportunities right into our incubator is a main priority for all of us. So this means having our startups represented on panel discussions, pitching their solutions, having them network at our events, and really asking them what they're focusing on. So from a content and theme perspective, that means, focusing on accelerating the commercialization and deployment of these technologies, right? So it's no secret that there's a lot of money flowing into the space more than ever. So how can we use our events to connect our startups with those investment opportunities? We have an extremely robust partnership programs as well, and an in-house corporate partnerships accelerator program. So we host events to highlight the impact of collaboration between startups and corporates. Additionally, we continue to think about how to drive the energy transition and making sure it's a just and equitable one. So DEI is paramount not only to a topic discussion and something we're really working with our startups on, but paramount to how we plan our events and use them to emphasize underrepresented voices. So that means absolutely no males, and excited to be on a panel of all women today. Additionally, building a climate tech workforce is huge for us, and that includes bringing in everyone into the energy transition that in all backgrounds and skill sets. So we have a number of events throughout the year that focus on career fairs and intern fairs, both in person and virtually, to make opportunities more accessible to everyone. And I'll use this time to quickly plug that we do have an in-person intern fair next Tuesday in Somerville. So we have over 25 of our startups tabling at that event. So if you know anyone looking for an opportunity, or if you're looking for an opportunity, feel free to connect with me after the event. So how does this all play out when it comes to planning the logistics of an event in a post-COVID kind of not really world? Well, for one, people really want to be back in person, myself included, and startups especially, since getting access to corporate partners and investors is paramount to their success. So from the planning side, I'm thinking a lot about the safety and contingency plan, which is so crucial to any event planning going forward. It has kind of changed the scope of how I think about events in a post-2020 world. So if there's a spike in cases, really thinking about putting that plan into place from the start, and really strategizing on when you're going to pull the plug on if you need to transition to virtual, and also, how that impacts your budget. I know Kristan really thoughtfully touched on how that can really impact your marketing budget. I think being back in person is certainly what everyone has been waiting for these past two years. I still see the value in mixing formats and aligning your event format to meet specifically what goal you're trying to hit at that event. For example, again, as Kristan touched on, networking is never going to be as valuable virtually as it is in person, no matter what event tech you use. And there are a lot of them, and I think I probably demoed every single one back when the pandemic hit. Virtual events like this do remain a great opportunity for marketers to highlight thought leadership. And again, to Kristan's earlier point, produce that evergreen content. Additionally, I think they provide the opportunity to kind of broaden your geographic audience, as well as secure more high-level speakers, since there's less of a burden on schedules and travel budget. So when thinking about aligning these different event formats together, it's only become more important and relevant to track the success of your event. And again, this really starts with identifying the goal of your event at the outset. And so that way you can advocate for the budget and resources to host and attend an exhibit event year over year. Using those outcomes and metrics to plan your event strategy is hugely important, and something that I focus a lot on when thinking about our events, because again, as you may have noticed, we host quite a lot at Greentown, and we want to make sure that we're doing quality events and not just quantity of events. And finally, I think this question was already posed in the chat, but I'll say it here now. I do think that hybrid is kind of here to stay. Again, as marketing and travel budgets continue to kind of be in flux, and companies are really assessing things, and different geographic locations are being affected differently, I think we're just starting to think about work travel again, and many folks do not yet feel comfortable to meet in person. So really thinking about a valuable experience for virtual attendees and in-person attendees, and managing your project plan to include that is crucial. This means investing in event technologies and platforms that can help drive that engagement, which is unfortunately really expensive. So make sure your budget makes space for that, and that your project planning for events includes those added layers of tech checks and event walkthroughs, because you'll need them, because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to get a speaker logged in onto an event and their camera's not connecting, and they only had 30 minutes slotted because they're a CEO of a major company. So having those tech checks and walkthroughs is definitely important. And so to that point, I'll just quickly highlight a real example of a large-scale hybrid event that we hosted in November of last year. Just to provide some context, historically, Greentown has hosted a demo day, which is a half-day open house where we open our doors and let our community into our prototyping lab to see our startups in the space where they're creating these technologies. So a really exciting, biggest event of the year, but really crucial to being kind of in person, right? So obviously in 2020, that wasn't possible. And so the team, I had not joined yet, did an incredible job of transforming that event into our Climate Tech Summit, which was a 2-day virtual event that had over 2,500 attendees, included a virtual startup showcase. So for 2021, right, we began planning in May of June of last year. If you can remember a time when we were feeling really optimistic after we'd all been vaccinated, we're taking off our masks for the first time, we're starting to plan this event, and it's all about being in person, right? We're gonna live stream it, but we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary in Somerville. We just opened Houston in April, like we're ready to get back in the lab together. And so it goes. Right after we announced the event in July, the Delta variant hit. And so it really put a pause on our planning, and we had to really sit down and think about reassessing our planning strategy. We're talking about a pandemic, so safety and science is crucial for this. So that's what we did. We built out an entire safety plan that included a vaccine and mask mandate, and then we limited capacity to help mitigate some, spatial and occupational issues. So we used Hopin to stream the event, and then we opened up the virtual networking and virtual startup expo to kind of expand on the virtual attendee experience, and also provide our startup companies who may not be able to participate in either location an opportunity to showcase to our audience. Additionally, we worked with our AAV team to provide the option for our speakers to attend virtually if they were not able to join us in person. So we had a number of sessions where we had 1 or 2 speakers that were dialing in on stage with fellow live panelists. And so overall, the event was a huge success, right? And hats off to the entire Greentown team, especially my colleagues in the marketing department, for helping support an event that took place in Boston, in Houston, and online simultaneously. It's no easy feat. We were able to safely welcome and host 850 people across both locations, and an additional 1,000 online. That included 70 speakers, 30 startup pitches, and 80 startup members showcasing. And then from a personal perspective, it was a hugely special day. It actually fell on the 6-month mark of when I had started at Greentown. So I've been working on this project from day one, and to have it be a huge in-person celebration of this incredible community was really special, especially as an event planner who really believes in the importance of human connection and had just spent the last 1.5 years planning virtual events. So if you're tuning in today, I hope you'll join us at Climate Tech Summit 2022. We'll see what kind of form that takes. Hopefully it's entirely in person. But if not, please join us at any of our other events that we're hosting at Greentown throughout the year. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jill. That was amazing. I'm just so awed by the work that you guys are doing, and how you're supporting the startup community. You must have a lot of best practices to share with us, and you've sprinkled those into your conversation that you were your presentation, but I'm curious to know, like, if you had to give like a top 3 or maybe even a top 2, what would be some absolute best practices that we just cannot forget in our type of environment right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall for any event, if you're planning, especially a large scale one, having a project plan from the outset and making sure that the entire team that's working on that event is aligned on those goals and the execution of it, that responsibilities are clearly set, the budget's clearly set, what you're trying to accomplish here, who the audience is. I think a lot of times you can get stuck in the perspective of kind of building. I think the term is, flying it as you build it, but really nailing down what that project plan is going to be and building that contingency in, especially in a COVID world. So, for this event, like I mentioned, we always plan to live stream, and we were prepared to kind of pull the lever and make the virtual experience more robust when needed. And unfortunately we needed it. And so that's really how we're kind of approaching things this year. We're really, again, trying to return in person safely. I'm feeling very optimistic about that at this point, but we're continuing to budget live stream teams and AV teams to be there so that people can join us from wherever, depending on what their budgets and comfort levels allow.
Okay, that's really great. There was a really—
to build on that.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of thinking, in terms of your goals, make sure you have a brief. We sometimes forget what that brief is. We say what our goals are. We want to raise awareness around our new product, or we're a startup and we want it to increase leads, or whatever your goals might be. But also ask yourself, are those goals the same as sales goals? And bifurcate them, not separate them, but make sure, because marketing goals are going to be a little bit different than sales goals, but we're there to serve sales, right? At least not from Jill's standpoint per se, but certainly from climate tech. If you have a product and a service, whether it's software or a hardware, align with sales and make sure that that they're reasonable goals. I would say that, and then build relationships. If I don't know how many startups are in the audience today, but Jill's a perfect example. Get to know your show organizer. And I say that because it goes back to budget. And if you don't know your show organizers and you don't have that relationship built, send them some swag, do something, get to know them well. Whatever it is, really get to know them on a personal level, to the extent that you feel comfortable, to where you can make some asks. If you get to know people, they're more willing to accommodate your needs, and they might cut you some slack on a cancellation policy, for example. If you don't know the show organizers, they're not going to give you a time of day. So those are some ideas.
Those are really good to think of. We had a really great question in the chat from Carrie. I'm just going to read this out, and I'd love for you guys to both comment. It said the 2 benefits that seem to come out of the virtual events was reduced greenhouse gas emissions versus the in-person with significant travel, and the equity with the greater ability for people to attend that might not have been able to attend in the past. So similar to the prior question, do you see hybrid staying part of events going forward to address these areas? And being in the climate space, do you look at carbon offsets to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions related to travel?
Yeah, I can take this one first, and then obviously Kristan, chime in with your perspective. I absolutely do think that hybrid and live streaming events is a great opportunity to open it up to people that might not be able to attend in person. We're actually hosting an Access to event next month, which is a great example of this. So it's really focusing on investment opportunities for women and underrepresented founders, and putting them, in a room with investors and hoping to talk about that issue and forge connections. But we did want to make it available to other people in the ecosystem. So we will be live streaming it, and so I think that's just a great opportunity to align, our initiatives and our morals with our event strategy. And then I think the other question was about carbon offsets, and our events are hosted mostly at our location, so there's not a ton of travel that's done there. But in my previous life at Green Tech Media, we hosted events around the country, and we actually worked with a company called Trip Zero, and they work with RFPs and contracting for hotel contracts. And it's actually a free service if you're an event organizer, because they charge the hotel and they work with you to calculate your carbon offsets. And so that's a great resource if you're trying to have that initiative as part of your planning for event strategy.
Those are good points.
When the comment that I made around getting creative and doing more user forums, let's say you have a hub, and obviously the San Francisco Bay Area where Nextracker is located and headquartered, a lot of clean tech folks are based here, right? There's a lot of investment dollars coming in here, as well as Boston, right? Energy Impact Partners and other folks. So, if you had a user forum, how would you help people get there? To Carrie's question or Carrie's comment, which is super appropriate, by the way, thanks for raising that. Go to Proterra, or go to, why don't you shuttle people in an electric bus? Get creative. There's lots of ways to mitigate that. Specifically in terms of travel. I know for one, in terms of international travel, we limit to the absolute must-goes. So in the past, there's been more, let's send, 15 salespeople. Do you really need that many? Just be budget conscious and bring down the DHGs from the standpoint of those that really need to be going.
That's a really good point around budgets. I was going to ask about that. I'm curious to know how you manage budgets, and what's a reasonable a cutoff date to be making decisions about going to conferences, and how far are you planning ahead?
Jill, I'll take this one first, and then I'll kick it over to you. Is that so for the large conferences, for those of you that have not been engaged in needing to book a booth space, you typically do that 1 year in advance. So that budget number would go immediately into your budget, into your overall calendar year or fiscal year budget, whatever that might be. And then you dial it back and you speak to your finance, and if you need to cut, which we always do, and then there's a song and dance that goes on with your sales, which is why you need to know your sales folks really well, and be aligned and be a unified force and work with your finance department and say, this is a growing market, we really need to be there. Or do we really need to be there? Maybe we cancel, and then you have to pay the $20% or 30% cancellation fee. But I would recommend a basic, and just make sure that every month that you're looking at your budget and looking at that event and see if it's going to be happening. You have the mainstays that keep you in the market, right? For us in the solar industry, we're looking at Solar Power International and maybe American Clean Power, and then or Intersolar North America. But there's also regional events. You can keep your greenhouse gas travel fee or travel greenhouse gas emissions less if you're doing your local event. But budgets, you have to be looking at your budget all the time. Yeah. Just get to know it and keep on tweaking it, but keep it fungible, because things are going to pivot and things are going to change.
Yeah, that's good.
But I spend a lot of time on budgets. It's not the fun part of the job. I'd rather be doing a photo shoot or something fun.
Yeah, me too. I totally agree.
But the more buttoned up you are, the more money you're going to get over time, because you're showing that you're really diligent and that you are accountable.
Yeah, totally agree. And you know, for Greentown, we're a little bit different since our event space is right where all of our startups sit. So the transition time between, you know, pulling the plug on an event, with the exception of Climate Tech Summit, which was, you know, obviously a much grander scale. We made that decision, I think, like two months out. But I was at Green Tech Media when the pandemic hit in 2020, and we were planning for a large amount of large scale events across the country. And so we were looking about 4 or 5 months out. And that's from, you know, the conference planning side of, we were on the hook for these venue costs, and we were trying to bring in sponsorship and sales revenue against those events, and trying to make value out of those events and ensuring that people would be there. So we were, you know, the life cycle for that was much longer.
And for the record, I still have that contract, Jill, from the Solar Summit.
That's not my fault.
2020. Now we're working with the right folks for
Okay.
But no, I mean, seriously, we have kicked that can down the road for 2 solid years.
Yeah, I don't think, I think our event contract still hasn't, I mean, I left there last year once they closed down GTM, but I think WoodMac still hasn't had the event at the hotel that I was just referencing from 2020. It was supposed to be April of 2020, and here we are. So yeah, again, being ironclad about, you know, what the contingency plans are with your venues, and also with your sponsors and clients if you're you know, in the commercial event side or, you know, marketing event side. So yeah.
You know, one of the things that I heard from both of you all was around, you know, the quality of engagement, the quality of ensuring that the show is going to be, you know, worth its while. I'm curious to know what kinds of metrics you're putting in your brief at the beginning to, you know, share with people, you know, these are our targets, this is what we're trying to reach. Not only definitely from on the marketing side, but, you know, if you're sharing any sales at all, or if you have a hybrid of both or whatever, just curious to know how you're tracking measurement and what are you tracking?
I'll start off. We track pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So probably it depends on the region. Each sales team is different, and the region is different in terms of how they register. So in the US, for example, and in Germany, well, mostly the US, let's say we're going to be conducting 50 meetings at our booth with customers, and that would be for the US. We know 1 month in advance when those meetings are all confirmed. Okay, so then we look at each customer and we look at the pipeline. What is that customer's pipeline? And then are we meeting the right customers at that event? And then we tally up how many megawatts and gigawatts of discussions have been discussed in share revenue numbers, and what that pipeline looks like. That's the number one for us. So we have a meeting calendar that we're rigorous on, and there's babysitting involved. For those of you that work with local regional sales team know very well that there's a lot of babysitting, but that's the nature of the game. I mean, there's no way you're going to get around that. Marketing babysits sales. Sorry, I've offended anyone, but it's the reality. So that we look at our pipeline numbers. Yeah. Now the squishy metrics around brand engagement and product awareness, you could tie it back to earned media. So if you have a product launch, how many media interviews do you have scheduled? I worked with Joey, he's on the call right now, when he was at Edelman and then later at Silverline. They were always really great at setting up our media engagements with our CEO if we had a product launch and so forth. So that could also be part of your integrated event wrapper. So it's not just the booth, it's also what are your media relations involved? You know, what is your brand presence and what does it look like? So, you know, you've got your hardcore metrics of your ROI, and then you've got your more intangibles. But, you know, I think earned media is definitely a tangible and a benefit. Just a couple ideas.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. From someone who's planning events for a climate tech incubator, again, the nature of event planning and event goals are a little bit differently, and kind of still goes back to startup engagement, and measuring how they feel it was successful, what kind of connections they made, which isn't a perfect science, right? So you can do that through surveying and getting feedback, and it tends to be a lot more qualitative rather than quantitative. But we do first and foremost try to look at if our startups feel that event was successful for them, or was fruitful for them, and tracking it that way, and then looking at engagement and attendee numbers. And I think looking at engagement, it becomes much easier if you're hosting a virtual event, because a lot of these platforms have really robust data and analytics that can tell you how much time someone spent in one session or at a booth, and that can give you some really good insights into what people are sort of gravitating towards, and you can use that moving forward, or to repurpose that content and lean more into that.
Yeah, there's been some questions about technology and Hopin specifically. Curious to know if you guys have any. I mean, you mentioned it before. How are y'all loving that one? Is that really only for big events, or what are you thinking for tech, part of your tech stack?
Yeah, so currently we use Zoom webinar like this for maybe some of our small, like hour-long panels, where it's just like, in this kind of format. And that works quite well, especially, because everyone's used Zoom, so everyone knows how to click into a link and log in quite easily, right? Especially for your speakers. Hopin, I am a huge fan of. That's what we have at Greentown Labs, and we used it for Climate Tech Summit, but also for a number of our smaller events that it works really well, especially for us. We do a lot of startup pitches, which can be really quick. So you're having to like bring a speaker on stage, they do their slides, take them off stage. So that transition works really well on the Hopin platform. I can't recommend it enough. And they have a great speaker user interface on the back end, so that you can have like your own event background. It's quite easy from an event management perspective. And then they also have a pretty good networking tool. Again, I mean, maybe I'm a little jaded after 2 years and demoing like every event technology out there. But they have a great one-on-one networking feature, which I think is very cool. It's like randomized. So if you go into the session, it matches you with someone, and then you are with them for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, however long it's set for, and then you have the option to extend. So it's great to kind of foster those like one-off event, introductions that you normally get when you're just like in line getting coffee at a conference and you say hi to the person next to you. So I like that one a lot. And then they also have a pretty great virtual expo and like session breakout tool. I do like that. It doesn't have a huge integration with like an in-person element. So we had to get quite creative when it came to different ticket types and breaking out segmented communications for our like Houston and Boston and virtual attendees, since we're trying to communicate, much different information leading up to the event. So, and they, their check-in technologies and things like that is trying to catch up at the moment, but I would recommend them. And I've also used Cvent and Visibo in the past. Visibo is okay. They're a great registration platform, and Cvent as well. And I think during the pandemic, they really started to build out their virtual capabilities. So I would check those out as well, because they might meet any of your, event goals that you might need. But for all of those, having really extensive tech walkthroughs, especially for your speakers, is hugely important, because you don't want to have a CEO or high-level speaker that's only blocked off 30 minutes to attend your virtual event, try to log in and not be able to connect their camera or anything crazy like that. So having tons of tech walkthroughs leading up to the event is definitely important if you're using any of these.
Well, I'll chime in. I'll just say that Jill is, this is her wheelhouse. So I would go to Jill to ask her what we should use for the online platform. I don't know if there was anyone, there's one platform, and maybe someone on this webinar remembers. Was anyone on the Clean Tech for Biden, what was it, Clean Energy for Biden platform last January? Bettina, I don't know what you think about that, but I actually thought it was phenomenal.
Was it the one with the tables and you could move around?
We had tables, you could easily go from each room to room. I don't know if people have any tolerance for that anymore. But I will say, if you do have an event and something happens again, God forbid, where we go in quarantine again, I will say whatever that platform was, I think Nico Johnson put that together with Andrea Lukey. It was fun. It was incredible. I mean, I got to talk to people that I don't think I would have ever been able to speak to at a live event. So anyways, for whatever it's worth, that was the Clean Energy for Biden. It was Jigar Shah's group last January. And then in terms of the knowing that we're kind of rounding out I had another idea, and I was thinking about branding when you're a startup, or you're a couple of years after a startup and you're going into revenue stride mode. Think about branding your own event that becomes something that is well known, that you want it to be well known eventually. The example that I have in my mind is Emily Kirsh's What It Takes. She's an incredible, if you've never listened to What It Takes, please check it out. It's a podcast, but they had live events, and then she could easily pivot to the online platform when we went into quarantine, and we still got that same great content, the same great information from startup founders and their experience, and learn from them through the What It Takes platform. But what they did was team up with, at that time, long ago, when What It Takes started, was with GTM. But think about, what are your media, who are your media partners, or who you have access to, and don't be afraid to just call them up. I swear, if you called Stephen Lacey or Canary Media or GreenBiz, they're more than willing to talk to you. Don't be afraid that you don't have something to offer. They're more than willing to get creative because they want to hear from you as a clean tech startup.
Yeah, that's really good. I think we might be ready for our quick fire questions. Do we have any other questions from the audience? This has been so amazing and helpful and thought-provoking. I know I'm thinking about my own events coming up, not just for Alder, for our clients. So some quick fire questions here.
I was going to ask Jill, I'm really curious, because you work with a lot of startups at Greentown Labs, and you obviously, aside from your main job, which is organizing events for Greentown Labs, you're also a consultant or a buddy for all your members and advising them how they should approach their events. What are you seeing them do? Because obviously they start with either no budget or very small, and if they have a very small budget, they need to be very careful that they get that ROI. Like, can you talk us through some of their thinking that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, a huge need for startups is meeting people, right? Securing capital, partnerships, employees, and how better do you get those access to those resources than by going to networking events, speaking, pitching your technology. So of course it's paramount. It's hugely important, especially if you really think about that. Some of our startups in 2022, were founded during a pandemic and haven't even had the opportunity to go to some of these things. And I think Kristan really highlighted a great point about not being scared to ask for favors. As someone who worked at a startup, media partnerships are a great resource. Getting free speaking and pitch opportunities. There's a ton of pitch competitions in the space. There's a lot of local organizations. I know I'm on the programming committee for Young Professionals in Energy in Boston, but they have regional locations all around the country. So there are a ton of, you know, local networking groups and organizations that can really provide, you know, a source of fostering that community and kind of building out your network. So I think that would be kind of my recommendation if you're a startup on the line. And come to a Greentown event, right? Like, our events are free. We welcome everyone. It's not just for our startups, you know, we're an inclusive community. So if you're in Boston or Houston, please come by or join one of our virtual events, or join any other, you know, incubator around the country that's kind of doing the same thing. Again, as Kristan mentioned, you know, Powerhouse historically has hosted a lot of events. So kind of finding those like free, ad hoc, or in-kind opportunities would definitely be my recommendation as you're starting to kind of ramp up your marketing and event strategy.
All right.
Close from my side, I echo what Jill just said. Thanks so much. This has been awesome. I did want to give the opportunity. There is a Solar Plaza event. Solar Plaza is located in Holland, but they have global events for a very niche area within solar and wind, and that's on the software / O&M and asset management space. If you are able to, this is a free event in the Bay Area. Feel free to take the link on the right-hand side. It's on April 5th. It's going to be a block party. We're going to have food trucks, and it's in the parking lot of Powerhouse in downtown Oakland. So,
how exciting. All right, well, now it's time for quick fire questions. So these are questions that I'm just going to quickly ask, and then give me your answer, both Jill and Kristan. The one must-do thing for virtual events is?
Walkthroughs. Definitely tech check, as many times as I can say it.
Utilize your brand ambassadors and get your sales team engaged to forward it to all of their customers.
Good one. I'm going to add one that make sure, and I'm looking at my name right now on virtual events, that you have your name and your company name next to it. Like right now, mine just says Melanie Adamson. I should have Alder on there.
Good job, Bettina.
That's a good one.
What's the funniest / worst thing that's happened during an event over the last 2 years?
The tech check didn't work very well. We didn't know that someone wasn't being heard for like 15 minutes. And no one said anything. And then finally we realized it was awful. And like 230 people were on the call, on the webinar.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, mine's a similar one. I don't know that I've had any like really bad in-person events, but the virtual landscape is quite scary. And the first event that I did in like early 2020, I'd never done like a webinar or anything like that before. And I think we like started and didn't know people were in the room. So we were just kind of in the green room chatting and getting ready to go live. And there was like 500 people logging in at that time. So quite an embarrassing thing. I still think about it from time to time.
So they were listening to your conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't saying anything bad or anything, but we were just like getting ready to start, you know, like we were before this. And it was like, I think I had like 400 IMs from my colleagues being like, you guys are live right now. So
humility.
Yeah. Right.
Those are lessons learned too. So I kind of asked this question earlier, but are people, I've had a lot of requests lately for print materials at the booth. Are people still doing that? I'm curious to know.
Ship to QR codes, screener.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And the US audience is getting more hip to it. Outside the US, it's way more used. Sorry, Jill.
Oh, no, go for it. I agree.
Cool. And business cards?
Still
a thing?
Yeah.
Okay, we're still printing those.
You can get some really cool ones that are like recycled paper, or I've seen some that if you plant them, they grow flowers. Like there's some very interesting eco-friendly options.
Good, good. Okay, so this one happened to me recently. I was at an event with my husband, and are we handshaking? Are we hugging? Elbow checks? Like, what's the etiquette now for meeting people in person? Or I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. At the same time, I'm still a little unsure about whether or not I want someone to touch my hand.
We have to be respectful. And having just done a very large event in Abu Dhabi, we did elbows. I don't know who anyone else on the webinar. Kathy, you just went to what, Inner Solar elbows?
Elbows.
I do a very awkward, like, I want to shake your hand, but I'm not going to. Like I'm not ready yet. But I'm not against an elbow.
Yeah, that's
as my mom always says, just smile and they won't notice.
I'm like, just embrace the awkwardness of that. We all don't know what we're doing.
And then my final question is swag. So, you know, I tend to think that a lot of this is throwaway stuff and it's not good for the environment. But is there any great ideas out there?
Branded masks worked really well for us in Abu Dhabi. So we got our brand out there and everyone wanted them.
Okay.
That's great. I totally agree with you about not being wasteful. I don't like junk. So I think anything that people really use is great. I've seen those like covers that go over your camera. Incredible, because if they're branded, whoever has one is going to look at your logo for the rest of time and think about you every time they open and close their camera or their laptop. So that one's great. But yeah, anything that's like, especially, you know, if you're in the climate tech space, the recycled t-shirts, love that. Anything fun like that. You know, Yetis are great if you have the budget for it. But I think quality over quantity is, I think we've seen a lot of like really junk swag bags that you just end up throwing out and they tend to be quite wasteful.
Yeah.
Agreed.
No. Great. All right. Well, I think we have concluded our webinar today. I really appreciate everyone attending. Bettina, do you want to close us out? You're on mute.
I know. See, This is what happens. Like the last minute, I can't find the unmute button. Yes, thank you so much, Kristan, Jill, for being here. Amazing insights. Thank you to the audience for being here, for all your insightful questions. We hope it was useful. Melanie, excellent moderation. Thank you so much. If you want to dive deeper into event strategy or any other marketing challenges, Mel and I, we do offer a free consultation from Alder to anyone. We will send out the link to our Calendly with the follow-up from the event where you can book. And you'll also get all the slides and the recording and the chat. So yeah, thank you very much for being here, and we wish you a great rest of the day.
Thanks for having us, Bettina and Melanie.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Good to see you, Jill.
Thanks. Bye.